Well, in this episode of Grace at the Gates, I continue this series on Christian and country as we explore themes of Christian nationalism. And I'm super excited for my guest. I'll introduce him, and then he told me to call him Darryl, but this is Professor Dr. D.G. Hart, Darryl Hart from Hillsdale College, and this is going to be great. Darryl, thanks for being on.
Sure. I'm not sure it's going to be great, but I've been known to let people down before, but it's good to talk to you. Good to meet you.
Yes.
Such as this medium affords.
Yeah, it's great to do it this way. So the semester wrapped up. Are you off for the break now?
Yes. I mean, lots of grading to do, and my wife and I will leave town to go to Philadelphia for several weeks, and so kind of have a gun to my head about packing and getting all that kind of stuff done. But it's nice to have the pressure off of having to prepare for class anyway.
I'm sure. So do you know Zach Groff?
I do. Yeah, we've met, hung out a few times. Yeah.
Yeah. The only reason he loves you because of the Philly connection. So he's good stuff. So you are a historian, right?
Yes.
How would you categorize? Yes, but you're also a churchman, and so what's your church background?
Well, I grew up Baptist, and in college read Francis Schaeffer, which probably bears in some ways on what we're going to talk about. And then that was my introduction to Reformed Protestantism. Went to L'Abri, came back.
Wait, where'd you go?
To L'Abri, Francis Schaeffer Study Center in Switzerland.
Yeah.
I was at Temple University undergrad and was going to 10th Presbyterian Church, which is now PCA, but then it was still PCUSA. But eventually found my way. My wife and I found our way into the PCA in Baltimore when I was in grad school, and then moved to Wheaton, Illinois, where my first job, and we were in the CRC, and that's where I was originally ordained as an elder. And then moved to Philadelphia to teach at Westminster, Philadelphia, and joined the OPC then, and have been in the OPC almost 30 years now.
Okay, so are you an elder in the OPC?
I am, but I'm inactive at our local congregation because I'm beginning retirement. I mean, I won't retire from teaching until the end of next year, but my wife and I leave here for the summers, and we leave here for Christmas break, and so that's not the best way to be an elder. So I'm inactive, though technically. I think once you're ordained, at least in the OPC, once ordained, always ordained, but not
you're an elder.
Serving.
Yes, you're an elder. So, wow, you're resigning or not? Or you're retiring from Hillsdale. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, I mean, it's with a lot of regrets because it's been maybe my favorite job so far, and I've just had great colleagues, loved what I teach, learned a ton. But my wife does not have the relationship that I do with Hillsdale College, and Hillsdale's a fairly small, isolated town, and asking her to keep hanging on here while I continue to do what I love is maybe too much to ask. We met in Philadelphia, so going back there in retirement is very appealing as well. And
okay, gotcha.
I can write anywhere seemingly, so that's what I'll still do, and I'd probably like to teach some ways, but no longer full time.
Yes. Okay. So I've been wondering about the Tim Keller connection, and I think I just I figured because I was like, how does a historian at Hillsdale have? So was it through Westminster when you were teaching in Westminster? Like, what was? I think I heard you on Presbycast talk about these interactions with Keller.
Right. Well, yes. It's one of the questions that you sent me in email. One of the answers to it would be, why am I obsessed with Christian nationalism is for similar reasons the way I was obsessed with Keller, and still am in a way. But so Keller Keller had recently left Westminster to go plant the church in New York City, but he was still coming to Westminster and meeting with faculty, and we were courting him to try to set up a branch campus in New York City, which never really materialized. There's still a kind of I can't remember the name of the seminary that did get started there, but and I just thought that, I mean, Tim is a good guy, responsible guy in many ways, but I didn't see in him what everybody else saw in him, and I thought there was a lot of hype, and I have a major detector for hype. Maybe I don't know where I got that from, but I really dislike hype, and so the fandom that surrounded Tim Keller really baffled me.
What years was this?
Well, my encounter with him began around 93 and beyond. So he was just on the verge of planting. But then when I went to Westminster, California, he also had a lot of admirers out there. And then, of course, you couldn't help but see him in the news, follow him online in certain respects.
Even in the 90s?
Yeah, and
Okay.
aughts, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's fascinating. Okay, so what were you? I want to get into this Christian national discussion, but I'm fascinated about some of this other stuff. What were you teaching at Westminster?
Well, in Philly, I was part-time administrator and faculty. So when I taught church history, but I was this is funny to me. That's why I laugh. I was directing the library. There is a tradition in theological education that the library director of a seminary or divinity school has a PhD and isn't necessarily trained as a librarian. So I had a very capable staff, especially a wonderful archivist and assistant librarian, Grace Mullen, who basically ran the shop and did the interface with the administration, etc. And then in Westminster, California, when I moved out there, I was academic dean. So again, administrator, but I also taught church history. So that when I've taught in seminary, I've taught church history.
So now this even makes more sense. I didn't know you were out in Westminster,
right?
West.
The fingerprints of Escondido, R2K. Yes.
There you go. Good. Well, that's good. That helps this whole conversation. I want to do a whole episode just on the library of Westminster, Philly, but we don't have time for that because that's got to be fascinating. The stuff that's probably in boxes over there.
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason we're talking, and I do appreciate this, and I think you're the kind of guy, kind of like me. Not that I put myself in your caliber, but that I'll talk to anybody. And so you and I went back and forth as you were battling. It was Darryl Hart against the world. It was that you were slaying the giant of James Baird and anyone who defends him.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, I love it. Definitely. I want to see some of your Philly come out. Come on. So, and I think, X doesn't give, social media doesn't really give us the benefit of laughing with one another, and it all becomes, it often sounds very ad hominem. And I'm friends with Miles, by the way. So Miles Smith, who teaches with you, and you know that.
Right.
And so I know so many people that think so highly of it. I said, well, let's talk, because what you were doing was like James Baird would post, just quotes from 19th century Presbyterian,
Right.
people in government even. And then you would come out with, James Baird is for jihad against Mormons, or James Baird is for rounding up Native Americans. And of course, it sounds slanderous, and so people are like, you're slandering him, And so talk to me about some of that. And why James Baird? Just because of his book, or what's the story?
Yeah, I mean, for some reason he's in my feed, so that's part of it. And I could go. I do follow Stephen Wolfe as well. But he doesn't come up as much. So when James posts these remarks about 19th century, even 18th century. He also quotes Witherspoon a fair amount. Um, you know, back before this, there have been lots of discussions at American Reformer and other places about you got to hashtag do the reading. And that means you got to read 16th, 17th century Protestant theologians on politics. Okay, I mean, I've done some of that. I've dabbled here and there. I don't think that necessarily solves 21st century America's problems. But okay, there's a tradition of political reflection there that I will concede, and I think everyone at Escondido, but I'll speak for myself, has said we're not doing what Calvin did. We're not doing what Rutherford did. The 2K, I don't like R2K. 2K is doing something different. It's doing something much more like Witherspoon and the revisions of the American revisions of the Westminster Confession were doing. So when James then comes along and starts quoting 19th century Presbyterians as if he's quoting Rutherford or Calvin or other 17th, 18th century figures, my hackles go up, even though I do see James online as a very likable figure. I mean, there are guys who are provocateurs. James is a provocateur, but it's a very good-natured, I don't like the word winsome, but it is a winsome way. When I compared him to Charlie Kirk, I really did mean that as a compliment. Charlie Kirk, I didn't follow him, but all the stuff I've seen about him since his death seems like he was like a warm, fuzzy bear. Yeah, he said some things that were indelicate at times, but still, he came across pretty approachable, and I think James comes across that way. But when you start talking about 19th century Protestant government, and his dates seem to be something like 1776 to 1886, or maybe 1790 to 1886. Just a lot of bad stuff happened in the 19th century in America. Even though I love America, I think you got to take the good with the bad. And I think it's unhelpful to cherry pick from the past and make it seem like, oh, things just went great with Protestant governments, even though they weren't officially Protestant governments. But even a Presbyterian like Andrew Jackson did some fairly bad things. So if you're going to talk about Protestants in government, it seems to me you also have to take into account the very difficult situations that they faced and then the kind of decisions that they made that we ourselves today probably would do differently. And so just again, this cherry picking from the past is it seems to me it doesn't really help the conversation. It gives people an impression that everything goes well with God, everything goes well with good government when Protestants are in charge, and I just don't see government working that way with Christians or non-Christians. I think it's a very difficult set of circumstances because you're managing affairs with people who are fallen, and you're also managing fallen people in government. And I just don't think that the religious component of politics solves much.
Right. So that does summarize it. And there's a lot there I want to try to engage with if I can remember it. So some of it is, and I see this. So there's this, it seems like guys in who, like in your camp, who are critical of people speaking of that time frame as if it were the glory days is as if, like you're saying, cherry picking. So they're ignoring like the bad fruit and acting like, again, it was the glory days. And somebody like me who is sympathetic to what they're pointing out is because of, like to use Doug Wilson. I'm not a Doug Wilson guy, but to use we're in clown world. Like the project has gone awry where we have Supreme Court justices who don't know what a woman is. And it's clown world. And so, there's this move among woke sort of ideologies to assassinate the character of our country and our founding and our initial principles as if it's all bad. Again, you think of tearing down monuments and all that. And so guys like James or others trying to sort of reclaim what that history was, like, it doesn't seem to me that the fact that they're not highlighting the ills that you're highlighting, that they're all, that they want to go back to that. They're just simply saying, in my reading of it, they're just simply saying, no, we were founded differently. And this is honestly why I respect and have a lot of appreciation for Miles' work, because Miles unapologetically says, yeah, we were a Christian nation. The founders and that generation between Revolutionary War and Civil War viewed it as a Christian nation and viewed their role as trying to not only maintain that, but propagate it through, again, he says institutions. But he includes, of course, the legislature and the judiciary, which I say, well, that's a government. I mean, they're institutions of the government. And so, but what you've pointed out is, yeah, but again, look, they rounded up Native Americans. There was a whole problem with the Mormons. I don't know too much of that history. And I just see, it seems to me like it's two separate conversations. Like, we can want to return to what they believed about this country and how how Christianity should be privileged and how it should influence the country, and also reject the sins of the country. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. So, and I'm not interested in bringing up the Trail of Tears with the Native Americans or the Mormon Wars. And I mean, I personally am ambivalent about, in many, more than just the treatment of Native Americans. I mean, I don't know that people necessarily have want to talk about the difficulty of having people of European backgrounds and civilizational expectations living with people who have not had that experience, and how do you make a way for those two kinds of people to live together? It wasn't at all obvious how that was going to play out, and the Europeans, the whites, got it wrong in many respects, but it's not like there was an obvious solution on the other side. So I want to give the whites all sorts of leeway to say, if I were there, I'm not sure I would have done any better. So I don't bring it up just to sort of get on the bandwagon of bashing America. I for what it's worth, I'm writing a history of Independence Hall right now, and I have never been more patriotic. I mean, I love the founding story. I love America. I really do. I hope I don't love America more than Jesus. I really hope that as well. I do think I have two loves here, and I'm trying to keep them proportioned. And honey, if you're listening, I also love you too, by the way. How to juggle all those loves is a difficult thing. But anyway, I'm not in any way a fan of bashing America. But what I would like to see some of the younger guys who are upset with how America's gone the last 10 years or more, and I'm upset as well. I mean, COVID, really, I still am not over COVID and what governments did during that. But there were all sorts of good actors in 20th century American history. And there's this phrase that I see now more and more, and it makes sense to me. People use the word post-war to refer, I guess, to post-World War II, as if somehow this is a period when things changed, at least among some young Christian guys. And I never knew what post-war was, because I'm thinking, wait, Revolutionary War, Civil War, World War I. I teach a course, Post-Cold War America, so there's another post-war period. So it never made sense, but somehow, I guess, after World War II, people seem to think things went wrong, even though I also get the sense 2015 is a major marker, or whenever Obergefell happened. And I do think a lot of people lost their mind during that. Added to that, the anti-police movement, Black Lives Matter, and then added to that, COVID. added to that climate change. There's just been complete nuttiness on the left, especially, but sometimes on the right. So, but in between 1945 and 2015, there are all sorts of responsible American voices, especially in my field. Like I think of Gordon Wood, who is a historian of the American founding and who recently has come out against the historical profession in some ways and ways in which the academy has gone woke, as it were. But I also think of Edmund Morgan, who in 1975 wrote a book on American slavery on the eve of the bicentennial, recognizing that slavery was a big deal. So it's not like people should be surprised in 2019. Oh my word, we never heard of slavery before. People knew about slavery. Don't give me that crap. You're just using this as a way to beat down either Trump or MAGA or the right or something. But I don't need to get a good view of America and to look for a fairly sensible approach to a lot of modern problems in America. I don't feel like I need to turn back to 16th and 17th century Protestants or even Hodge, the Hodges, Charles and his son Archibald Alexander Hodge, or others, to sort of see responsible voices in 20th century American politics who actually know how a liberal government operates. And you're sure they got some things wrong, but I don't see religion as making a big deal to the way that they tried to understand America's history, its traditions, patriotism, and America's role in the world. That's a part of it that I find really helpful, those voices. But here's one last point to this, to add to this, so, and then I'll shut up for a second at least. But I have seen, and I've seen this throughout most of my professional life, the Kuyperian, I don't like the word worldview. That's why I put it in brackets and hyphenated, etc. It's like a dirty word to me, but I'll use it just to make sense. The Kuyperian integration of faith and learning aspect to evangelical higher education, reformed higher education of the last 30, 35 years. It's swept through American higher ed. Francis Schaeffer was an early proponent of it. And what I think it has done is led Christians to want to read Christian voices on all sorts of subjects rather than reading non-Christians on these subjects, and also finding wisdom and truth in what non-Christians provide. Because, if you have a worldview and if your faith informs everything, and if you don't have faith, your outlook is going to be flawed in some ways. And so the kinds of studies you're going to be doing about history, nature, government, or whatever is going to be off. I think that was a really bad turn. And I think most people in the R2K world, that's why they advocate some kind of natural law. I'm not a natural law guy. I haven't read deeply in it, but the idea that the light of nature, which even the Confession of Faith talks about, reveals certain things to us. Even when it comes to church government and worship, in chapter 1, it talks about light of nature revealing those things because the Bible doesn't. So I think, the insights that the ancient pagan philosophers had, the insights that Enlightenment thinkers had, the insights that Jewish American neocons in the mid-20th century have had, all of those voices, it seems to me, would be valuable people to consult in thinking about American government, politics, and society. And most of them, I would argue, would have been on the so-called right side of some of these issues that have tormented us the last 10 years.
Yes. Okay. Again, a lot there. I think that's helpful in understanding your thought on this. You brought up the post-war. Have you read R.R. Reno's The Return of the Strong Gods? Are you
I
familiar
did
with it?
a long time ago, and I reviewed it. I can't remember where. I am familiar, yes.
Okay, so that's primarily where people are getting the quote unquote post-war consensus. So that would be And I actually had a whole conversation with James Baird on this podcast. It's one of the last
Mm.
ones. So if you have an hour in the car,
No, I'm
he'll
going to go
talk
back
about it,
and yeah.
because I questioned him on this because we defeated Hitler. We defeated the problem, and yet there was this move in the country sometime after World War II to sort of reject the very things, the quote unquote strong gods that this country was founded on. And so they're using God there as ideas, really. Truth, justice, that kind of thing. And so pluralism comes in, tolerance comes in, egalitarianism comes in, and every worldview is given equal footing. And, you know, you may like that, but that is what they're arguing against. And so I think what's interesting is some of these conversations are kind of churchman conversations, and some of them are political conversations. So you really see this thought of, again, going back to 20th century or 19th century or 18th century guys, because of Presbyterians, because of NAPARC guys saying this is part of our heritage. And clearly, when you go back in time further, I mean, you have Covenanters and Establishment Principle and original standards, and then go back even further, you have Calvin's Geneva. And one thing I've appreciated about you, honestly, is you're honest about that. You're honest about the American. I've heard this a year or two ago. I don't know what you were on, whether it was one of these panels you were on representing your view or whatever. And you're very clear that something different has happened in America that has changed, that is part of our history and has changed our outlook on some of these things. And why I'm saying I appreciate that is because typically when I hear these Escondido guys talking, and I'm not going to name names, even though I know I said this on another episode, Chris Gordon wants me to, but they act like, they act like they're drawing upon Calvin and, other, again, even those same 19th century, maybe Presbyterian figures, and they're cherry picking, because those same guys were very fine with public expressions of Christianity, faith, and even sectarian Christianity in and among government things. And so, at least to me, you're at least honest that, there was a break in the American experiment, and you generally are favorable to that, it seems like. So,
Yes.
So my question on this, and I want to also get to the idea of what the church's or scripture's role is in some of this. But do you view, okay, so if James wasn't simply cherry picking, if he was more open about some of the, like if the debate shifted from these were the glory days back, again, whatever, 1800s or 1700s, to we like the foundations of where these guys were going, this is where it went wrong, and then the debate shifted to why it went wrong, why there was genocides and rounding up of other cultures and intolerance of whatever else. Like, are you generally fine with guys who want to do what James is doing? I assume you read his book. Did you or no?
Yes, I have.
It's fine if you do. Okay. All right. So his basic premise there, that the government should be promoting Christianity, are you fine with that, or in general you're not fine with that? I think I've asked too many questions.
Yeah.
So you enter into whatever you want.
Yeah. Well, I'm not fine with it because an American concern going all the way back to the founding is taxation without representation. But Americans are sensitive about taxes, and government can only operate on the basis of taxes. And if you're a non-Christian and you're paying taxes to a government to promote Christianity, it seems to me this doesn't have to do with representation, but it does have something to do with whether you're promoting then a religion that is opposed in some ways to my religion. And I could understand why non-Christians would be upset with that. And a lot of 20th century policy and legislation has been to try to work around that configuration. So what to do with a population that is not Christian? How do we get this? So we'll back away from the public stuff. I don't necessarily think that we've done it well. The Supreme Court cases that made Bible and prayer in public schools unconstitutional was ham-fisted at times, and now I think the courts are revising some of that. And I think part of the problem too in the 20th century has been the consolidation of the federal government's authority because it's operating a Cold War and beyond. It has decreased the ability of local and state governments to manage these affairs. But if you could turn over a town in Iowa that is predominantly Protestant and let them figure out how they're going to do the Christmas scene at the courthouse, or whether they're going to have Christmas carols during the homeroom exercises in the public school, I'm fine with letting them figure that out and not having a one-size-fits-all policy from the federal level. But I do think from the federal level, you got to be careful. And I don't see James and some others making that sort of federalist distinction between, I know they do want to talk about state governments were still established churches, etc. But even there, as I tweeted, not I'm expecting people to follow my tweets, but the case of Massachusetts, which was the last established church in the United States, and it was established in the sense that the Constitution requires each town to have teachers of the Protestant religion, not churches, but teachers. But they looked at pastors as teachers. Well, that finally came unglued with the rise of Unitarianism, and you have churches in town. One is a Unitarian, one is a Trinitarian. Who's going to support which? So they just said, forget it. We're not going to have taxes go to either side. We'll do it. We'll do without. And so that's been a way. I'm not saying that people inherently mean government promotes Christianity. They're thinking taxation, but I think they should think about taxation. And Americans are very jealous about how their tax dollars are spent. So if there is just a kind of, there's going to be a chaplain who opens Congress sessions with prayer, even that military chaplaincy, I think, is a very mixed bag and has all sorts of compromises built into it thanks to mixing government and religion. But if you have, the president concluding speeches with God bless America, all that kind of generic civil religion stuff, if that's what you want, promoting Christianity, or fine. I can live with that stuff. And I think some expressions of American civil religion can actually be inspiring, even though I think they're a danger because it does lead us to confuse our love for God with our love for this civil religious God.
Is some of this just pragmatic or practical? Like this is the hand we've been dealt in 2025, and so like is that some of this conversation? There's guys like you.
No, I think it's huge. I mean, I'm writing a review of James' book. I haven't started it yet, but I mean, he puts a lot of weight on the word public. Well, and the public good. But I mean, public can mean a lot of things. And in the American public, which also is close to the American people, we have a lot of people who are not religious, or who are not Christian. And, I don't know what your experience in the Northeast has been like, George. But for me and my wife, who's from New York State, but we met in Philadelphia, I mean, we adored Jewish American comics and Jewish American comedy. And I've taught courses on Jewish American comedy. Yes, Hillsdale lets me do that. It's not necessarily the true, the good, and the beautiful, but it is the funny. And my life would be less rich if it weren't for Jewish American comics. It doesn't mean my life would be awful, but I've just appreciated from Woody Allen to Jerry Seinfeld. I mean, that's just a world. But aside from comedy, there's a documentary about four prominent Jewish Americans who oftentimes are known as neocons, even though one of them was a lefty. Irving Howe was a literary critic, but Irving Crystal, is that right? Bill Crystal's father, Nathan Glazer, and Daniel Bell are the four characters in this movie called Arguing the World. It's a wonderful documentary, and these are really smart men teaching at Ivy League institutions. Yes, I can be in awe sometimes of those universities. And I mean, they made great contributions to American politics and policy, higher education. And I think an America that welcomes people like that and allows those kinds of people to flourish is really a great thing. And so again, I don't want a Christian America that would make those people, restrict them or make them feel uncomfortable in some way.
Yeah, well, that's clarifying, and I'm sure that's going to raise some comments. But well, the idea that because I think the project. So I talked to a friend of mine. He interacts with you quite a bit. I'm not sure if you've noticed. Obviously, hundreds of people interact. His name's Don. I don't know how to say his last name. Rubottom. But my role now is. Good. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
So he because my role now is with ministry to state. So I'm a pastor in Florida state government, and I'm not pushing policy. I'm there for soul care for people and to do Bible studies and pray with them. And it's a PCA. It's under MNA, Mission North America.
Right.
And so, and some people have given me a hard time about even doing these interviews, but I'm interviewing everybody. I've interviewed you. I interviewed Brad. I'm just trying to get clarity, because one thing that's frustrating to me online is just, it feels like people are talking past each other. And I know I talk past. I mean, it's just, that's the nature of online. But Don seems to, so he works in Florida's government. He works right for the Speaker of the House, honestly. And he has a lot of respect for you. And but that seems like when I go to coffee with him, these are his same concerns. Like, we live in a world right now where a lot of this is, impossible to implement. And I can't tell if the fact that it's kind of impossible now to implement means it's always forbidden. Stephen Wolf talks about, he's doing a political theory. This is what it would be or should be. It's interesting because Stephen Wolf's not post-mill, whereas he's a-mill. So it very much is for temporal good in Wolf's Christian nationalist project. And it also is very much about maintaining American and Western civilization, identity. Whereas a Doug Wilson, who's a post-mill, he's taking the long game. And so he's not looking for the temporal good. He's looking for, what it could be in 500 years. And I don't know if you've seen any of Doug Wilson's interviews. And he did CNN. He did New York Times with Ross Douthat. And he recently did Sam Harris, the atheist podcast, because people are fascinated by his project. And from what I can gather, whether it's a James Baird, who doesn't call himself a Christian nationalist, but by all measure of the category would be, when people say things like promote Christianity, Don and I get into this. Don's a lawyer too. It's like, well, what does that exactly mean? Is it simply, like you said, tacking, God bless America, or having an invocation that's distinctly Christian? And from what I can tell, what these guys are doing in their projects is they want a conscious acknowledgement that Christianity is foundationally responsible for, you don't like the word worldview, but the presupposition or worldview of the founding of this country and how the government was founded and what the nation was to be. And yeah, to not give other religions equal footing just because we happen to be pluralistic right now. And so the government would operate presuppositionally as if it were operating on Christian principles. And so, uniformly these guys, and even guys who repudiate Christian nationalism, like a Todd Pruitt, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but
Yeah.
he he wouldn't be in favor of the calls to prayer in Dearborn, Michigan, or the Diwali public celebrations in I think it's Texas. So that's the bare minimum for these guys is an acknowledgement of this, that we are founded as a Christian nation, and we are going to just not pretend like we're not. All the way to the extreme examples that want to legislate the first table of the law, and even there's confusion, because I don't see any of these guys saying they're trying to compel belief, but they're just not going to allow governments to do public blasphemy, and they're going to order society to regulate the Sabbath, commerce and such. So again, I said a lot, trying to summarize a lot of what's going on here. My curiosity is, if we weren't today, and we were creating the ideal society, would it be able to be in your political philosophy distinctly Christian, and not while allowing religious liberty in the sense that Muslims, atheists, Jewish people can, in the privacy of their homes, be what they want, but society is going to preference Christianity? Like, is that an allowable political position?
I would say it's allowable. It's certainly, well, intellectually, it's allowable. I mean, I don't see it in the New Testament. I just don't. I mean, I teach Western Heritage here. We go from Hammurabi down to John Locke. And, when Christians discover government and its possibilities is not until Constantine. And I try to get students to imagine what it would have been like to go from an emperor an officer who used to persecute Christians and is now, Eusebius is telling you, he's like Jesus' best friend. And he's like doing all the good things in the world. And, and it seems to me that the New Testament message is much more one of keep your head down, honor the emperor, hope for a godly and peaceable life. But, there's no prescriptions in there about how, okay, when we get government, this is how it's going to roll. There's no sense that government is coming. There's also a clear sense that the old government in Israel is no more. That's not the way Jesus' kingdom is going to operate. Now, there's lots of discussion and debate about what Jesus' words mean when he says, my kingdom is not of this world, or render unto Caesar, etc. And I acknowledge that. I'm not saying that there's one view that everybody must hold on those matters. But I do think that the pre-Constantine church is much more in a New Testament mold than the post-Constantine one. And most people today are caught up in that. And it takes until, I think, the American Presbyterians and the revision of the American Confession to sort of begin to roll back that Constantinian element. And I do think in the original Westminster Confession, the language in chapter 23 is at times very Constantinian, where government can actually call synods and preside over those synods. That's exactly what Constantine did at Nicaea. And in the American revisions, that's gone. One other layer of this, after 1789, is and we haven't talked about him, but this is also very much a part of my own thinking, is J. Gresham Machen. I mean, for much of my career, I've been known as Machen Boy, even though I've written books about H.L. Mencken and John Williamson Nevin and Ben Franklin, but no, I'm still Machen Boy. And that's okay, because I really respect the heck out of J. Gresham Machen, but his views about politics very much influenced mine, and he was very much opposed to a Christian America. No matter what Doug Wilson recently wrote about Machen and government schools, and Machen was very critical of government schools, but Machen was a clear pluralist, hoping for immigrants to find their way in America and hold on to their languages. And he seemed to really embrace a kind of cultural pluralism, not to mention a spirituality of the church at a time when the mainline Protestant churches were doing a lot of what today's Christian nationalists want. They were executing a social gospel at all sorts of levels of American society and government. And Machen, to his credit, and I don't think he knew how big that problem was, but he pulled back, and, God bless the little OPC, tiny, and we have our own Christian nationalists in our midst who don't get Machen, etc. But that's in a really important turn, I think, in American Presbyterianism. Machen's been an inspiration, obviously, to the OPC, but also to the PCA when the PCA was founded. And that's a part that I don't see the guys who advocate doing the do the reading hashtag stuff. I don't see them reading Machen. And Machen's no slouch. He's not some off-brand Presbyterian. And so, not because I wrote a book about him, just read Machen. The institutions of 20th century conservative Presbyterianism do gain a lot of life from the efforts of J. Gresham Machen. And he doesn't fit the Christian nationalist narrative, so I understand why they may not want to cite him.
But aren't we? So so that's well taken. And my thought is, because I have a lot of respect for Machen, Christianity Liberalism was a influential book in my own understanding of things, but Machen too is a product of his very stressful circumstances in his day, and he tried to fight and reform, and they kick him out, and so thank God what the Lord has done through him. But it almost seems like all throughout history you have this sense of this is not, in other words, it's not a new debate. So Machen sees that the Christian nationalism of his day was liberal Christianity, and he didn't want it. I get it, I also don't like when people want to point back to, well, look at what it was 100 years ago, 150 years ago. I'm like, well, look at what it is today. And so I honestly, I don't know where I fall on these discussions and debates. I want our nation to be distinctly Christian. But I know we can't impose that, because if 70% of this country is not, then we can't impose that. But like Kevin DeYoung asked Van Drunen on an episode once, not mine, his own thing. Well, okay, but if we were going to set up a Presbyterian colony on Mars, would you create, a government that reflected that? And Van Drunen's answer was no. And it's like, that's just mind boggling. Like, if a people know the truth and have the truth, and, again, you're not going to set up a government that tries to compel faith. I agree. There is two kingdoms. Christ is over both. But you can have a government that doesn't allow the government. You can have a government that, while it doesn't seek to compel faith within its citizens, the government itself isn't overtly blasphemous, like allowing for public blasphemy. Society is ordered to honor things such as the Lord's Day without forcing people to necessarily be in a church building. I mean, there's certain things that can be done, and where, to me, it seems like we don't know where the line should be, and so there's some people saying, well, then there is no line. And I'm more saying, no, I think there is a line. We just ought to be able to figure out where that is. Also recognizing we need to act prudently in in a society that is, I don't know, statistics, what does it say? 60% are Christian, but really it's under 30 who actually believe things like we believe. So yeah, and for me, I just think we ought not like demonize or excoriate people on whatever side of the spectrum they're on in this, knowing what our own history was as a denomination. Like, we're not going to. So you brought up like Constantine. He's always the bad example. Well, I'm pretty grateful we had a council in Nicaea. Yeah. And I'm also pretty grateful that, the Westminster Assembly was called by the government to give us the standards. Right. I mean, these
it's a mixed bag.
Okay, good. I love hearing you say. So what is, you did, you're out of Escondido a little bit and all that. What is Two Kingdoms theology? And I mean, again, Calvin talked to Two Kingdoms. I really don't see what Van Drunen is saying is what Calvin is saying. So what is this modern Two Kingdom sort of philosophy? How does that play out in church-state relations?
I think the church should mind its own business. And as the Confession of Faith says, in cases extraordinary, may petition government if government policies are hurting the church. But otherwise, the church institutionally remains separate. Christians themselves, church members themselves, may serve in all sorts of capacities. They may even have their own associations of political activism or whatever. I prefer they wouldn't do it in the name of Jesus, but if they wanted to do that, that's possible. But don't put that burden on the church, which has the supreme duty and privilege to proclaim the glorious news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Don't confuse the two. So that's what I think Two Kingdoms is trying to do.
Do you see anybody in the? I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know you're short. Do you see anybody in the debate trying to do that? Have the institutional church tell the government and impose itself on the government?
No,
like in this debate,
I don't.
Right? I don't either. Okay, good.
But it's partly because, and this is part of my frustration with some of the younger Christian nationalist types. Whether you go back to, Wilson in his early days, or American Reformer, or Davenant, or even Aaron Renn, who's in these worlds because he's somewhat associated with American Reformer, but somehow these guys look down upon the OPC and the PCA. I get the OPC. We're tiny. Nobody, we have a lot of intellectual firepower seemingly, but still, the PCA, I hear it sometimes. You guys are the smartest ones on the planet. You're the thought leaders of America. Whatever. But even so, it's like, then put your resources. I wish Doug Wilson and Lightheart and others had said, well, no, we're going to join the PCA and try to make this a really good church. I wish Tim Keller would have used more of his energy to making the PCA a better church. But what so many people do is they set up their alternative institutions, which kind of then become the place for fellowship and reflection. So, you have those organizations that are kind of sidelining the institutional church.
No, wait. Let's talk about that. So you mentioned like American Reformer and what Davenant, and I don't know if First Things would be included in that.
Yeah, you could, but they're less Protestant, obviously.
Right, but you
Gospel Coalition.
Yeah, okay. Well, Gospel Coalition is different, and I'll explain what I mean. Like you just highlighted, you don't want the institutional church doing these things.
Well, so activism or politics.
Yeah. So, that's why these other associations show up. So it's it's individual Christians doing exactly what you said, coming together as Christians, not as the institutional church, to say this is what we believe, how Scripture is telling us to engage in public and politics. And so it seems to me they're doing that. Now, Gospel Coalition, you're right. That's like this parachurch thing that's trying to exist outside the the church, and Keller's responsible for that, and
Right.
we're all dealing with it.
But I mean, Davenant leans Anglican, as I understand it. American Reformer kind of leans Baptist, as I understand it. And Wilson's enterprise is CREC. But at Davenant, at times, and at American Reformer, often, these people are telling me, a Presbyterian, how I'm supposed to think about politics because I'm a Presbyterian, and all these Presbyterians in the past thought this way. Well, I'm sorry. I've been Presbyterian. You guys aren't. Don't tell me how to think about this. If you're doing the reading, become a Presbyterian. There are viable denominations out there that you could join, and then be like Calvin, be like Rutherford, all these Reformed worthies that you want to cite. Come along and join us rather than tell us how to be better Presbyterians.
Well, some of them are. So Wolf is, and Timon Klein is. But you're right. Others, I think Josh, William Wolf is not. So, yeah. Well, this to me is fascinating.
One other thread that came up here in comments you were making. I mean, the part of and this conversation has been helpful in many ways, George, and I really do appreciate your talking to me, and you're.
Likewise.
I mean, I think we both share a kind of Northeast sensibility, which maybe helps. But part of it is this post-war, pre-war stuff, and there's a sense in which some people want to go back. This is what MAGA also in some ways reflects, to a time when America had a better sense of itself, to when it was sensible and not doing the kind of crazy things that have been going on, at least for the last 10 years, if not more. And so how do we recover that? And that's a kind of a historical question. How do we tell the story better? And there are lots of historians who have done it, though I think the Academy has also really missed out here and has not helped us. And unfortunately, I think the Evangelical Academy has too much followed the mainstream Academy in picking up on the narrative of debunking America and debunking American greatness properly understood. And I think American greatness can be defined in historically responsible ways. Then there's the question of how you get outsiders who come to America, who don't have the British Protestant background, and identify with America. And that happened for a long time, up until, you could argue, 1950, where Italian Americans, Irish Americans, Polish Americans were incredibly patriotic. They bought all the stuff about Lincoln and Washington and all that stuff. And then somehow in the 60s, 70s, and beyond, it kind of went south. And we've got to figure out how that is. But here's the other point. So what bothers me about some of the Christian nationalists, and James is a little bit in this ballpark, even though he does it in a much more perhaps Charlie Kirkish way, but I feel like they're LARPing. They're live action role playing, if I get that meme right. And so what they're doing is they're poking people on the other side. They're poking them the way that the squad in Congress, the way that Muslims in Dearborn sometimes want to poke Americans and say, oh yeah, well, this is what we are. We're going to poke you. And whether Christians should be in the business of poking is one thing, but whether that's a very good strategy for joining hands with the other pokers in America doesn't seem to me make a lot of sense. It seems to me maybe what you want to do is celebrate the greatness of Washington and Madison and Jefferson and Franklin, all of whom were really bad Protestants. They're still Protestants, but not very good Protestants. And somehow recover that kind of weird Protestant, British, American political mix that was able to allow a lot of room, as Miles shows in his book, for local institutions, local communities to live in a fairly Christian or Protestant way at times, while also sometimes welcoming newcomers in, sometimes not. But there's a really great side to the American story that I don't know that the poking necessarily gets at.
Yeah, and so Darryl, you do poke. You have no problem poking back.
No, I don't.
Okay. And honestly,
no, but I'm not. But I'm not. I don't. Well, I mean, I'm poking. I think I'm poking at the pokers. But as far as if I were going to make serious proposals for what America should be or do, or how government should think about things, that wouldn't be my style to poke. I'm going to try to do something.
Right. Yeah. And
else.
so how I got in it with you is because I've seen friends who simply quote. I got and my honesty here is I just don't have a great grasp of 19th century Presbyterian history and the whole slavery thing and all that. But they'll just quote guys like Dabney on something, and they'll be attacked for being racist. And I just think that's unfair. So when you told James, said James Baird is for jihad, I responded to you as if you were, and then I got your shtick, to use some Jewish humor for it. I got your shtick on what you were doing, and I know you're lighthearted, and that's why I wanted to reach out to you. And then I started to be able to do it back and forth with you. I know I saw you look at your watch. I know you got to go eat lunch with Miles. So let me you got like 5 minutes?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So a couple of final thoughts. To your OPC PCA comment, this is what I've come to. And, the OPC and the PCA were formed out of liberal circumstances. And so the OPC is always trying to prove to everybody how they're the real reformed people. The PCA is always trying to prove to people how they're the thought leaders. And the ARP is just on the long, steady sort of trajectory of being who they are. And in doing so, they're pretty darn reformed, and they actually are thought leaders. So that's as a PCA guy talking to an OPC guy, that's what I see. It's almost like PCA and OPC are trying to prove their identities, whereas the guys like the ARP just know who they are. So that's one comment. The next one is just on the church, kind of stay out of these things, and historians and politicians have kind of perspective that should be prioritized. I think it's both. And I think, not to throw you in a camp with Keller, but Keller was always famous for saying, well, as a pastor, I can't tell you how to operate in your field as a doctor or in this or in that. I honestly think it's both. I think the church does, yes, have the keys to the kingdom, but they also have the scriptures. And the scripture speaks to all of life. And as a pastor, I'm speaking not just on matters of salvation, but now that you are saved, how are you to act as a husband, as a father, as an employee, and as a citizen? And I do think the scripture has a lot to say also to magistrates. And so what the corrective is not to cut the church's voice out of this, but to take the voices of historians, politicians, practitioners, and magistrates to say, yeah, but boots on the ground, this is what's happening. And so I do think it's been a helpful conversation back and forth. I appreciate Miles' perspective on this. I appreciate yours. And then the last thing I'll say, just to end it on a fun note, do you get royalties from your Nero comment? That Nero was not operating against God's law, and like, do you get royalties?
I sure wish I did.
Do you want to say anything about it as we sign off?
Well, yeah. I mean, I read that, and I still think my point is simply that Christians do not get a pass to break the law, and on Nero's terms, the apostles were breaking the law, conceivably. I don't know what the exact law was. But here's the thing. I mean, they knew they were going to get killed. And they did it anyway. We must obey God rather than man. I fully agree to that. And I think if any Christian has a conscience level conviction and they cannot obey some of the laws of the government, what federal, local, whatever, fine, go ahead and break it, but don't expect you to be declared innocent. If you break the law, you're going to suffer the consequences. Now, if you're a citizen like Paul, you can sort of claim, you can try to work within your rights as a citizen and negotiate some of that. And, so going to court is certainly permissible, but simply saying, oh, I'm following God, and the magistrate's going to respect what I do no matter what, even though what I'm doing is against the law, I don't see how that in any way makes sense. Even though I have great admiration for the heroism of the apostles and can't imagine the kind of deaths that they experienced.
No, they considered the cost, and they counted it all joy to suffer for Christ, and they knew. And I do think that part of the point, and if that's the point, that's great. Yes, Christians, we may need to do civil disobedience, and then we also have to accept the consequences of that.
Right.
I think the issues that come up is Nero is not above God's law, so Nero can make laws that he has to submit to God's law. And that's the
right.
But anyway,
Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I'll start a GoFundMe so that you can receive royalties for. This has been such a joy, Darryl. I appreciate you, brother. Yes.
Likewise, George. It's really good to talk. I hope our paths cross so we can talk in person.
Yes. Say hi to Miles for me. And I'm going to have some concluding remarks, but I know you got to go to lunch, so you could step out as I just sort of conclude this. Yes.
All right.
Thanks, care.
George. See you.
Yes. So as I've said, I'm the state capitol minister to the state of Florida under a ministry called Ministry to State, which is under MNA, the PCA's North American Mission Agency. And I get to start officially January 1st. I've been here in Tallahassee for about 4 months, fundraising, meeting people, already part of Bible studies in the state capitol. But January 1st, I get to start. Thanks to those people who have given to support me already, I'm able to start. I'm about 60% committed for next year. And usually you wouldn't be able to start under those circumstances. But as I said, because people have been giving for the last 4 or 5 months, there's money in the account to enable that. And so this is my plea to you. Wherever you stand on these issues, I hope we can all agree that we should be praying for our elected leaders, our government workers. 1 Timothy 2 tells us that we would live peaceful and quiet lives, godly and dignified in every way. The first thing Paul says why we should be in prayer for those in positions of authority over us is that it's in our best interest. But then Paul goes on and says, because the Lord wants all people to be saved and to come to the knowledge of the truth. And that's the goal here. And so if you believe in that, there's a lot of rhetoric, a lot of tweets, a lot of posts, a lot of posturing about having a godly government. Well, I'm boots on the ground on your behalf, seeking to shine the light of the gospel into this place, seeking to do soul care for those who are serving on your behalf. And while it is only in Florida, rising tide raises all ships. I hope that it would influence neighboring states and the rest of the country such that we would all seek to live in ways and govern in ways that are honoring to our Lord. And so if you would consider prayerfully giving me an end-of-year gift, or even maybe perhaps being a regular contributor. You could set up recurring giving or make a commitment to give next year also. But I could use those end-of-year gifts. You would go to ministrytostate.org/Florida. I hope to put the link in the show notes. On that page, if you scroll down, first of all, it'll tell you the mission of Ministry to State, what we're there to do. But then there'll be a link that says Support George on the left-hand side under my picture. It's red. Click that. It'll take you to MNA's giving page, and you can donate that way. I hope you will. Also want to give a plug for Birmingham Theological Seminary. I'm really grateful for their ongoing support of this podcast. They've supported me for a couple of years now, as I've been a student there and helped countless students get connected with BTS. For everything, for certificate programs, for people in the pew or churchmen, ruling elders, deacons who want to bone up on their theology and Presbyterian polity, to master's degrees, MAs, MDivs, They have THM programs now for those who want to go on and get a PhD eventually. And I'm in their DMin program. I've been on stall for a year because of this transition. I hope to re-engage. I'm at the point where I should be writing a dissertation. But BTS, man, they have so much going on there. They are exploding because of the exploding in a good way. Just because of the flexibility and the quality and the affordability. And so check them out at bts.education. You could tell them you heard about them through Pastor George's podcast. That would help. Thanks for listening. I hope to summarize these Christian nationalism, Christian and country episodes in a final episode, maybe an article kind of highlighting some of the views. And again, the whole point of this was not to promote a view, but to help us understand the positions. I think, obviously I tipped my hand on a few occasions in what I believe. So thanks again for listening to Grace at the Gates as 2025 almost over. God bless.